Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's my privilege to welcome you to our final plenary session. Let's get ready, educating all Americans for success. You know, Governor Polis launched this initiative last July as NGA chair, and it couldn't be more timely. Governors from both sides of the aisle are joining to find bipartisan solutions to this most important bipartisan issue. Through Let's Get Ready, governors are meeting throughout the year to share ideas and best practices and to collaborate on developing more effective metrics to identify what's working and, just as importantly, what's not working. When the initiative wraps up in July, findings will be compiled into a roadmap governors can use to drive innovation and better measure outcomes in their states. At every turn, governors are consulting with teachers, parents, students, and community and business leaders. And Let's Get Ready is partnering with organizations that are making a difference, like Girls Who Code, Khan Academy, College Board, Google, and other organizations who are implementing innovative programs from tutoring to after-school programs to apprenticeships that engage students. And I'd like to highlight an opportunity for everyone here to get involved. Since 2000, the Donors Choose crowdfunding platform has helped over 6 million people and partners contribute $1.8 billion to support 3 million teacher requests for classroom resources experiences. And that number is about to go up because Donors Choice has provided each person here with a $50 gift card you can use to directly support a teacher's project in your community or anywhere nationwide. You should have received your gift card when you registered, and if you haven't redeemed it yet, visit donorschoose.org to find a classroom to support or use one of the QR codes we've placed around the meeting space. So a special thanks to Donors Choose for your great generosity. To tell us more about the education priorities he's advancing in Colorado and through his chair's initiative, let's give a warm welcome to the chair of the National Governors Association, Colorado's Governor Jared Polis.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, governors. I'm thrilled to welcome you for a great and powerful conversation with two national thought leaders on Let's Get Ready, educating all Americans for success. Thank you to our fellow governors who have been part of this initiative. We have an additional gathering coming up in New York next month. When it comes to education, governors are uniquely situated to lead. We don't run the schools, but we are the major funder of the schools. And in fact, for most of us, it's the biggest line item in our budget. So we are in the position to say, hey, are we getting what we need from two perspectives? Are we getting what we need in terms of the individual learner's opportunity to succeed and overcome obstacles? And are we getting what we need as an economy to power our growth, to power our success for the success of the employers in our state? Just last month, the newest edition of the nation's report card, NAEP, was released, showing that too many U.S. students are struggling with math and reading scores. Far too many students nationwide scored below basic level on NAEP. We all also have our state assessments, and we know that math and reading are important ways to measure success. But we also want to ask ourselves, what else should we be measuring, even for the students that are achieving in reading and math? How are they getting the skills they need to succeed? Whether it's in college, how do we make sure they don't need remediation, can graduate in 3 or 4 years instead of 5 or 6 years, or if they're going to the workforce, how do we make sure and measure whether they're graduating with the skills to hold down good paying jobs, and again, meeting the needs of the private sector and our companies? How can data better inform us whether students are career ready and college ready? How can we harness technology to identify and implement solutions that lead to better outcomes? We as governors hear from employers and businesses all the time that they struggle to find workers with skills to match open jobs. Most of us in Colorado as well, we have more job openings than we have unemployed people, but there is a mismatch between the skills of those who are unemployed and looking for work and the jobs that are open today and open tomorrow in wait of a qualified applicant. There's so many great examples across the country of what's going right, whether it's in Colorado Early College Charter School, where every graduate of high school earns an associate's degree concurrent with their high school diploma. Norman Aviation Academy in Oklahoma, public high school, students can get a degree in aviation maintenance or a pilot's license while they're in high school. In Hawaii, Governor Green is expanding access to nurse academies in high school. Students can can become nurse practitioners, phlebotomists, concurrent with their high school diploma. We also call that stackable. They can continue on to become a nurse practitioner, a doctor, other medical fields, but they have that entry-level medical field preparation right in high school. We have the opportunity through this panel to really engage some of the nation's top thought leaders about assessing and measuring what's working and what isn't. What are the skills that kids need, not just today, but just as importantly in tomorrow for our states and for our country to succeed. That's why I'm so excited to hear from our panelists today. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions. We'll have a discussion for about 20 minutes and then open it up. Emily Oster is a professor of economics at Brown University, a mom of two, the best-selling author of books like Expecting Better, Crib Sheet, The Family Firm, The Unexpected, as CEO of Parent Data. She's on a mission to provide better data to help parents navigate everything from pregnancy to preschool and beyond. We're also thrilled to be joined by Kara Swisher, a leading authority on all things technology, a podcast pioneer. She's an editor-at-large for New York Magazine, the host of On with Kara Swisher. I never know what platform she's on, but we just follow her. All your fans do, across whatever platform you happen to be on, which is many of them. We know the platform has finally made it if you're on it. She's co-founded the technology website Recode and Tech Conference Code, has written for Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, many, many others. Please welcome to the stage Emily Oster and Kara Swisher. Thank you. Thank you. So I told them each backstage we'd start with a fun and light question, although they're not all fun and light. They're serious questions in their own right. And then we'll get right into the education. I thought I'd start with Kara. She has known and has interviewed Elon Musk for decades, covered him. He seems to be having a good time. My question is, and this is very important for the future of humanity, what is the genre of the video game he thinks he's playing right now? Because it makes a big difference, whether it's a real-time strategy or a first-person shooter, or like what exactly, what game is he in right now, and what can you tell us about that?
Wow, that's a good question. I'm not sure what game he's playing. He's obviously in some world of his own much of the time, like the other night at CPAC. I think he thinks, years ago I interviewed him, and he goes on this idea that we're in a simulation, that none of us exist, and that this is not real. This is like a video game for aliens from a smarter being, essentially. But I do think this is correct. He thinks he is Ready Player One in any video game, that he is the center of everything. And that we're all NPCs, which is non-player characters, and therefore are expendable at all times. And so I think it's not a particularly funny answer, but he does think in those terms. And if you pay attention to video games, you can learn a lot about his personality, I would say.
Thank you. So, by the way, Emily Oster is, and if you ask the young ladies in your office who've recently had kids, she's a hero to them because she's the one who said you can have sushi and an occasional glass of wine while you're pregnant. But what I want to ask about is, sometimes people take a grain of truth and go too far. So, while people are excited and relieved, yes, a pregnant woman can have an occasional glass of wine. That's not your blessing by any means to have, a bottle and a half 3 nights a week and the danger that can cause. What do you see in today's world that might have a grain of truth in it, but is being completely kind of distorted and overblown and interpreted in a way which was probably even worse than the old way we did it?
Yeah, so it's not a very funny answer either, but I think I would pull on vaccines, where when you sort of look at that conversation about childhood vaccines in particular, people sort of pull on a grain of truth, like not every kid needs the hepatitis B vaccine at birth. There's no problem with giving it, but it's not necessary, and they'll turn that into, the government is trying to poison everybody by giving them unnecessary vaccines. And so we've sort of lost the plot a little bit, and I think partly it's because we're not doing a good enough job explaining to people why that might be recommended, when it would be necessary, and so on. But I think that lack of explanation is giving people an opportunity to take those little things and turn them into big things that lose trust.
Great. Now, back to you, Emily. So look, we, as I said, measure math and reading in schools. We probably measure those things pretty well. Nothing's perfect. We're not doing well enough. We get that.
Yeah.
What else should we be measuring and looking at that, in your experience and knowledge, kind of correlates directly with successful outcomes for kids throughout their lives?
So I think the important, perhaps the most important general principle here is to say that if we have a policy that is targeting something, we've come up with a policy, we've said this is a policy we think we want to implement because we think it will matter, we must have something to measure that we can use to evaluate if that works. It's the same question you'd ask if you were in the private sector. You say basically, I'm not going to spend my money on an initiative unless I have a way to know if that's getting me back what I need. And I think the same is true in education. So if we're going to have policies around vocational training, which I think is something that is very important, we need a way to measure that. How do we measure college and career readiness? So I run a data set in which we try to clean up all your state data on grade 3 through 8 test scores, and some of it's cleaner than others, just FYI. And that data is all there, and it's something we can measure, something we try to improve. If you looked and you said, well, I'd like to put together the same kind of resource on college and career readiness, everything is different. There's no systematic way people are measuring that, and I think if that's one I would really pull on, sort of thinking systematically about what do we mean that someone is ready to contribute to the workforce. What are we looking for there, and how can we try to measure it?
And Kara, when we talk about the workforce,
Yeah.
The workforce today is not the same that was needed
No.
or that people get paid for well a generation ago, and it's very unlikely to be the same in 10 or 20
Correct.
years. What does that mean to you in terms of what do you think some of those future and current workforce needs are that we as governors should be thinking about, better preparing kids for in the future?
Well, you know, as sick as I am of Elon, and honestly I am, I moved to DC and then he followed me here, which is really, they all did.
Yep.
Tried to get away from them. They're obsessed with me, obviously. I think it's really important to think about what's going to happen, two things, with AI and the deleterious effects of technology. I'm a technology positive person, as are you, and I think it's important to use technology. But one thing Elon did say, and I think he's correct, I also said it, 99% of intelligence is going to be digital or AI generated in the future, and 1% is going to be human intelligence. And I think it's very clear where it's headed, and it does it faster, it does it better. Right now, AI is at the level of a dolphin, and it's going to surpass that. And dolphins are pretty friggin' smart. And it's going to surpass it. And so we have to think about what does that mean for what jobs are with people. I've been warning about this for a decade, like radiologists, you know, you can figure out where it's going to go. But what do we need to create smart people who can deal? And I think schools, you did not mention, but I have 4 children. And I think about this a lot, like what is the job for them in the future? What can they do? And one of the things you have to think about is where we're going and what they should be doing. And the 3 things I think are critically important is promoting creativity, because AI cannot beat creativity. Second thing is team building, which is critically important, is teaching kids how to team build and work together and collaborate. And the last thing is critical thinking, which I think has been lost. There's no need for memorization anymore. There's no need for that. But how do you learn about history or English or humanities and then pull them together in a cogent way? And then on the deleterious effects of technology, anyone who's a parent understands this intuitively, but I don't think we've done anything to regulate the technology. And I know it's very cool now to be anti-regulation, but most people, when I ask this, how many regulations are there against the technology industry, say compared to pharmaceuticals, oil, gas, things like that, there are 0. We have done 0, and these are the richest and most powerful people on the planet. And the fact that we've done nothing and now they want more deregulation, you can't have more deregulation.
Now, how do you, but you know, on that, it seems like more often on tech, government gets regulation wrong rather than right. So
They've never gotten it.
What's that?
They've never done it, so.
Well, how do you make sure it doesn't make it worse rather than better?
So you're sitting around waiting for planes to fall out of the sky, and so they're already doing that. And I think that's the argument Silicon Valley makes, is that we're so innovative, you don't understand us. Well, I think a plane is complex. I think pharmaceuticals are complex. I think nuclear energy is complex. So
one instance that worked, I think, maybe you think it worked, Digital Millennial Copyrights Act for intellectual property. Do you think that worked pretty well overall?
Yes, that was, what, a decade ago?
Yeah, well, more than that, 2 decades ago, I think.
Yeah.
Emily, so Kara talked about what we call soft skills,
Yeah.
which, there are ways to measure: teamwork, critical thinking. These are great. We also have, and you talked about and alluded to, hard skills. I mean, we're talking about, how do you, in aviation tech or HVAC repair, how do you balance both of those? And again, another challenge is when you start measuring for too many things, you get static, just as if you're not measuring for enough. So soft skills, hard skills, what's the breakdown? How do we look at those?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's very difficult to measure some of these soft skills. We'd like to measure, socio-emotional development. We'd like to measure how people work in teams. That's a really hard thing to measure. We measure test scores, and I think people can poo-poo the kind of let's measure math and reading, but actually, being able to read is pretty important, and a lot of kids cannot read. So to sort of, I think it actually is important to sort of step back a little bit on those fundamentals, and this kind of, what Kara's talking about is absolutely right, and I think we also need to think about how are we training kids post, for more complicated things. But if kids can't read and do basic math, which is true of many children in America, then they are not going to be equipped for the economy of the future, the economy of the present, the economy of the past, no economies. If you can't read, you're not equipped for a job in any economy, and I think that's probably useful to remember. When we start talking about measuring more and more and more things, yeah, it gets messy, and we run into the issue that teachers are then in a position, or school districts are in a position where they're trying to do a million different things. So if you as the state, you say it's really important that you prepare people for this, and you do this, and you do this, and you do this, they're not really gonna be able to focus on one thing. So I think that is the challenge of it's like a multitasking challenge in economics. Basically think about how we can incentivize in the directions that we want and that are productive and that we can achieve, rather than just telling people sort of do everything, make it all nice.
I wasn't saying you shouldn't have these basics. That's not in place of it, but I think some of the skills in the future will be around creativity and what humans can do differently, because so much is going to be, I'm an old person, so I know how to use a map, but many people don't anymore, and they don't understand. Like, how do you move into a new society where a lot will be done by these agents for us?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I just think that it would be a mistake to ignore, in Detroit, not to pick up, but I was looking at this in my class the other day. In the Detroit, Michigan school district, 10% of black kids are testing proficient in math and reading. That means 90% are not testing proficient, and unless you fix that to some extent, I think it is not gonna be helpful to push on these other things. Once we fix that, yeah, then I think you don't have to get all the way before you start thinking about, how are we gonna train people for an economy where they don't need to know the capital of Greenland, because that's not important.
It's really both and,
Well,
right?
it may be important,
Maybe
right?
important, right? That was probably not a good example. Not a good example,
But the
okay.
actual
Well, wait, it's really,
Can I point out one of the things that's important, though, when you put this on, one of the reasons we're seeing some of this decline, and it needs to be measured, speaking of measuring things, is, again, the deleterious effects of social media and screen time on people. Again, I'm a tech person, and you have to start to understand that phones should not be in schools.
No phones in schools.
No phones in
No
schools.
phones in schools.
I just did the CEO of Yonder, which is pouches. It's an addictive thing, and it is, as you were saying, the notifications, the inability to look away. You cannot focus, and the only schools that are doing that are rich kids' schools, right? Private schools are doing it.
Private schools.
And it's really important to remove them from the equation, because I think it's. I don't know if you can. I think you should legislate it. We legislate cigarettes. We legislate all kinds of things.
Well, and that's the interesting question, right? Because in the political context, as from a data perspective, although there needs to be more data on the effect of this on kids.
Well, wouldn't it be nice if Facebook gave it to us?
There
but
you
they
go.
won't.
But it's a question of who, right? Should it be the parents, the school, the state? And there's, we have legitimate disagreements. My friend Spencer Cox would say ban them. I say it's up to the parent. But none of us are saying the phone should be there. But it's a question of how we achieve that.
I think, so look, this decision, decisions in education are largely made at the district level, but what I think the states can do is make this more possible. This is not that easy for a district. Parents don't like it. Your school tries to get rid of phones, but it's like, what if I need to call my kid in third period?
Yeah.
You'd be like, well, actually, they're in the bathroom recording bathroom TikTok, during third period. You don't need to call the office, or they say, well, how will they know where their schedule is? It's on their phone. It's like, well, we all figured that out, There's this thing called paper. You print it out. It's fine. But I think that schools are going to face headwinds and doing this from parents, And there is an opportunity for states to think either from a kind of providing some scaffolding or from a funding standpoint or from talking to Yonder and figuring out, like, there are ways in which you could make this possible without legislating.
And reports from schools that are using it are very happy once the
great.
resistance is
Yeah,
gone.
as soon as 2 days in. I mean,
Especially
you know,
the kids.
and the kids like it.
And so, you know, talked about the negatives, let's talk about the positives. Use of technology in schools for individualized learning. What have you seen work, and is this, in this reality where you could have more customized, grade appropriate instruction? The fundamental challenge teachers always face, right? 25 kids, 5 have mastered the stuff they're teaching before they even start, 5 are way behind. You have maybe 10 that you're teaching to, and you have, you know, 5 that it's going a little too fast or a little too slow for. How could technology help?
I don't think it helps the kids at all. I think it helps teachers come up with lesson plans and everything else. Because, you know, all of you, I urge you to use the chat GPTs and everything else to see what's happening. It's sort of like the early internet when I was like, use the browser so you understand the technology. Use it and understand how powerful it can be. But for teachers' lessons plans, for pulling information, even though there's some hallucinations, it's getting better. It's getting better, but you should be using it to understand. So for teachers, I think it will be an invaluable tool.
I think for kids in sort of in use in schools, we know from the data that, you know, kids learn a lot better from a person than they do from a computer or an app. And so I think the most successful versions of this I have seen is people saying, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to divide the class more. I've got 30 kids. We know that kids learn much better in a group of 10 than in a group of 30 because you can differentiate, because you can, you know, teach them more just teach more to them. And so rather than doing 30 kids for 90 minutes, I'm going to do 30 minutes for each group of 10, and the other 2 groups are going to do apps that are, you know, literacy promoting and so on. And then you sort of accept, like, basically, I am using this. It's not as good as a person. It's not the whole thing, but it's a scaffolding that lets me really develop detailed instruction in a kind of targeted way. And so I think that's the kind of thing, thinking of it as an and not an instead of.
And the problem is adults are addicted. That's the thing. That's the real, everybody is addicted because it's necessary. You have to have it for work. It's addictive.
It's like, that's ESPN has got you on the notification. Jared
It's necessary, it's addictive, and it's everywhere, and you cannot escape it. And so that's a real problem. It's like, you know, I interviewed Mark Benioff many years ago, and he said it's like a cigarette companies, and I think it's not unlike that, except cigarettes are less dangerous. Oh my God, I sound like a Republican. Anyway, I'm teasing.
Well,
I love you guys.
cigarettes are also very
I'm teasing
dangerous.
you.
Cigarettes are also very dangerous.
Yes, they are.
So Emily, let's talk about kind of gamesmanship and measuring. So, like, you know, in education, we could say, hey, we want to have higher graduation rates. Guess what? A district could reduce their graduation requirements and achieve that. We say we want to have certificates of, you know, competency and a skill. They could just toss them out like candy. How do we make sure that what we're looking at is quality, and how do you deal with, in all the data sets you deal with, how do you deal with people gaming the data?
It's really hard. I mean, and so, you know, we see this all the time, even in the like 3-3 proficiency, you know, you lower your cut scores, and then it's a magic, everyone's more proficient. And so, you know, and I think it is always very hard. As soon as you point to something, as soon as you say, I'm measuring this, effort is gonna go into that. And even if it is not effort to kind of game it, it's effort to work on that instead of something else. And we always need to be thinking about, like, what are the incentives that we're providing people? For me, I think the value of data here is sort of, there's something more we could do to try to figure out what's working that people are already doing. And I think that's almost always a missing piece because school is so decentralized that we have, you know, every school district is choosing their curriculum differently. And I know, like, a lot of the states now have sort of, we have a menu of curricula. You know, we're gonna do science of reading. Okay, and here are the 6 curriculum you're gonna choose from. Well, I hope that you're collecting information about what each of your districts is doing, like which of the curriculum they pick, so you can go back and see, like, which of them works the best, because that's how you're actually gonna learn which one you should really be encouraging people to use. So I would rather people use data almost with this kind of natural experiment approach than to sort of point to, you must fix this, because then you are almost always getting into a gaming system.
You also have to think about things like vocational stuff, because there's so many more complex systems that are, you know, Europe does this quite a lot, and these jobs make enormous amounts of money, and for some reason they're looked down upon. I don't know why, because they're incredibly complex and they're going to be more interesting. And also,
What kind of what?
plumbers, HVAC, all these energy things, cybersecurity, all kinds of really critically important things that those jobs are not going to get lost, actually. They're going to become more complex, and you're going to be using AI with them. But it's going to take a really smart person to start to, and they're very high paying, and they won't be as disrupted as, say, a lawyer. Not that any of us
So,
worried
and
about
this is a
that.
good question for you, Kara, because and we're going to open it up after this to our governors. But yeah, beyond the numbers, there's something called culture, and you're right, culture. For many parents is, hey, my kids are going to go to college, or it might think that vocational might not be as good a way for kids to get a good job. When we, as governors, kind of see data and we say, wow, it is. It'd actually be a really good economic decision.
It
You
is.
can
They make a lot
you know,
of money.
100,000 a year instead of just 40,000 a year out of college. There's no college debt. I mean, so these are, how do we're sort of bit players in culture, you're a player in culture, but how does that cultural shift occur with parents, with decision makers, to kind of value what the economy values, which is also what can benefit?
Well, just look at AI is going to disrupt the information people. The
So it'll do to
lawyers,
knowledge
exactly.
workers
The
what-
knowledge
yeah,
workers are
yeah.
screwed, like right now, right at this point. But I think it's interesting because I think about my own kids. My one son is a computer person in physics and chemistry and everything else. He's going to do fusion energy. He's very much a geek like you used to be, Jared. He really was. I knew him before he was a governor, and he was very geeky. And then my other son, who initially thought maybe I shouldn't go to college, and I think I was very supportive of that. If he was interested in the military, he wanted to be a cook, that you didn't need that to do it. It's just figuring out what that path is then. But I think it's hard because parents always hope their kids are going to go to college because that's the path. But it's not going to be the path going forward for a lot of people.
Let's open it up. We can, I think, begin with our Vice Chair, Kevin Stitt of Oklahoma.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate the conversation. You know, I really am interested in those multiple pathways that you were talking about, internships, apprenticeships for the HVAC. So in my state of the state, I kind of challenged our businesses and our educators to get together to create 250 apprenticeship programs across the state. So I'd just be interested in learning more about that. How does AI, how do we get that, you know, integrated in society where people aren't just automatically shoving kids towards maybe the traditional four-year university and really integrating that into our society and the conversation?
You know, I'm not trying to slag universities, and although I wish I didn't have to pay for so many. But there are, like Google is doing this credentialing thing. Like, what is a credential anymore, right? Do you have to have Harvard after your name to be successful? And I think that's already changing, but this sort of credentialing that tech companies are doing, it's sort of promoting that idea of expertise, right? That where you have an expert in blank, and where these things become more important in society. I think it's going to naturally happen because these jobs. I was talking to someone who's running a well-known technology firm, and they casually said to me they have 6,000 software programmers. I'll have 2,000 by next year. It doesn't need, you know. And even my son, who's at Michigan, he said, "Oh, we put up a graveyard in front of the computer science building because their jobs are not going to be there." And Berkeley this year didn't place people. Like, so you have to start to be thinking of where you're useful. I think the market's going to do it to itself, and then people will find their way. But you should encourage all these kind of things because.
But I think what's hard here is I think the parent piece of this is tricky because there are a lot of parents out there for whom this is the thing that happens after high school. Like, that's the mark of success is you go to high school and then you go to college. And that's how I know, like, you know, and it's true if you went to college, it's also true if people didn't go to college. You know, say like, I want my kid to be the first person to go to college. And I think that will change because what people mean is I want my kid to like have the opportunity to have a life where they like make a good living and they can raise a family and they can be, I mean, this is like all the basic things that people want for their children. And I think the more it becomes clear that this kind of training is leading to that, the more we are going to get that sort of shift in how people are conceptualizing success. And I think there is a role for schools to sort of think about when a kid is struggling and, you know, or when a kid is just seeming like maybe college is not like their
Shouldn't
path.
probably be seen as struggling,
Not
right?
struggling, yeah, no, that's not the word, I think that's not the word. When a kid is sort of, seems like this would be a reasonable, like, schools can do more for this. We have college counseling. Maybe we should have, like, vocational, career counseling. Like, we should think of this as career counseling as much as we think about it as college counseling, and maybe that's a kind of shift that would be helpful.
You know, we've always been focused, to those who care about opportunity and access, we say we want to break down barriers for first-generation college goers. You know, if they don't have that family legacy going to college, their parents dropped out of high school, how do we make sure they can
Well,
succeed?
community, supportive
Succeed.
community.
No, but what I'm saying is what I think we're talking about here is in many ways the converse of that. How do you break down the barrier for multi-generations of college grads, kids, to not go to college and to go a different route? Because that's a cultural barrier
Well,
that exists
when
there,
they
too.
don't have jobs, and that's coming.
That forces it. That forces it.
Forces it.
Yeah.
Thank you for the session. Thanks for this. Thank you, Governor Polis, for your leadership on this, and thanks for this. I started my career actually right here in DC Public Schools as a fourth grade teacher in a program called Teach for America. And one learning from my experiences as an elementary and middle school teacher is we were presented these rubrics of things that we had to teach on strict timelines, and what often was left out was mental and emotional supports for the kids. And what I saw as a teacher, and I now see as governor, is that just from an economic perspective, the investments that we're often told are too expensive, if not made, yield costs that are tremendous, not just for our schools, but for our economy and for our community. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on sort of early childhood, maybe even preschool investments that yield serious results.
She's the expert on this. I have a kid in pre-K4 in DC Public Schools, go DC Public Schools, which are amazing. I have to say, the emotional and social.
Which school?
Hearst. It's great. It's fantastic. But she's the expert on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a lot of evidence that pre-K, in particular, that sort of early childhood is a scaffolding into, you know, kids better being able to absorb kindergarten, and to for some of these socio-emotional skills, we could still be teaching more of them when the kids are older. But, you know, the importance of this early childhood is not to be discounted. I think the other piece of this, and I think Governor Polis and I have talked about this a bit, like, there is actually a pretty substantial economic case for some of this early childhood education. We have actually a fair amount of research suggesting that providing early childhood, especially with some wraparound childcare, can make it easier for parents, for moms, to work more full-time when their kids are in pre-K, and then they are able to get on a career ladder that has them with more income when their kids are older, even without working more hours. And so there's a real opportunity here to scaffold learning for kids, to get them into a place where everyone is getting into kindergarten at a more equal footing, and helping families and the economy. So I mean, pre-K seems to me like total
It's amazing. I have to
win-win.
say. And also the demonization of public schools has to stop. The best teachers, my other kids went to private school. Public schools are astonishing. These teachers are astonishing.
There's definitely good and bad on both sides.
Sure, but I'm telling you. the public
Governor
school
Lamont
teachers are better.
of Vermont,
Connecticut, same
Connecticut. Yes, I know.
Similar, very similar.
Sorry, Phil.
For those of us from the West, they're all the same up there.
Hey, Kara, I
Yeah.
want to ask you about regulation. You were sympathetic to it. I would say that you're going to have 40 different states all doing their own
Correct.
version
That's
of
the
AI
problem.
regulation for lack of any initiative coming from the feds.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I worry that we're spending hundreds of hours in our state legislature defining high-risk algorithms and,
Yeah.
you know,
Shouldn't do
reasonable
that.
precautions. I think it'll be about 100 legal cases before that's defined. And it's either those jobs are going to go to Georgia or they're going to go to China. I worry about that.
Right. I think that the fact that the feds have not acted, it's been the most ridiculous. This is their job to do this. Privacy legislation. There's no antitrust legislation, no privacy, no algorithmic transparency. And then Europe is doing it, and probably too much, right? But that's what's governing everything. And by the way, some of Europe's are great. But the fact that you have to, a state level is impossible to run, and it's impossible for these companies. It's bad for innovation and capitalism. And so the government has to start to make some choices here, rather than either doing too much or giving away the bank, which is what is happening now.
And this is interesting because this is a rare space for governors to be. Usually we say, we want more state authority, don't let the Fed screw it up and micromanage us. This is one where I've said, you've said, I think probably most governors here, please preempt us, figure this out federally. We don't want to have 50 different regimes that hurt American
The
competitors.
tech companies, go look at their tech lobbying spending. They kneecapped Senator Klobuchar, absolutely, no question, on several great.
Governor Pula.
Thank you. I have a question. I think earlier this week the president spoke to us, and he threw out a statistic that I'm not sure if I got it correctly, where he said, like 2018 or some year, that's what I'm sort of like searching for. In the US, he was referring to Bobby Kennedy as the HHS secretary. 1 in 20,000 of our kids were autistic. Now, it's about 1 out of 38? 36, 38. So what was the year, the difference, the year?
Well, let me just say,
much longer.
and Kara's a journalist, I'll say this, for citing the current president is not considered a reliable source in a document.
not
But the point that autism has increased is true. The numbers were not, but autism has increased. Do either of you have any insights on that?
I spend a lot of time
Yeah.
with people with autism in technology. They've done rather well for themselves, I have to say. But actually, it's astonishing, actually, or a version of it. I don't know the exact statistics. I think there's diagnostics of it, too, that we're noticing what it is. Before it was just other things. I think we're sort of beginning to understand it as a thing. And I think the idea is what do you ascribe it to? What is it chemicals? Is it this? Is it that? And I think nobody knows what they're talking about, I would have to say. And I think anyone using statistics right now is not accurate in any way, no matter who they are.
Yeah, I mean, these diagnoses have gone up a lot over time. One clear reason is an increase in diagnosis. How much, what share, we don't really know. Most of the causes of autism appear to be genetic, and so there are some theories surrounding who's mating with who, is how economists would say it, but like who is getting married and having children. You have two people who are closer on the spectrum who get married, like maybe that's part of the increase. There are a bunch of reasons that are plausible. We don't have a great sense of how to divide them. I would say that one thing that has been quite conclusively demonstrated to not be the source of the increase in autism is vaccination for children. And so just like that is like, if you said like, what is the one thing that is not it.
So we can rule that one out.
That one's ruled out.
It's
There are a
just
bunch of other
untrue.
explanations.
It's just untrue.
Yeah, it worries me because every time I go see a doctor in a false church, she would tell me, half of our population is bipolar. And I was like, what? And so the question,
It's diagnosis. It's now we have words for everything, right? If you have a kid, you get one time when my kid was 4, one of the teachers at one of these private schools, I love public schools, was like, your kid doesn't have executive function. I was like, what the fuck? What are you talking about? Like, he just ran around like a lunatic, right? Like, is that something fresh and new? Just make him, and I just said, just let him run around the playground 3 times. I'm sure it'll take care of itself.
So let's kind of flip that. So, whatever
I'm an excellent parent.
I can definitely, I think being the teacher of your kids must be a treat.
No, you know what I also said? Don't do homework. Homework sucks.
let me make one more point.
It does.
Let me make one more point. The point that is right now in our country,
Yeah.
the reality is that, of course, there's life outside of Washington, but a lot of people at this point are nervous.
Yeah.
Or are kind of afraid of where we're heading. We're a divided country. And as a governor, a new governor, of course, Kiso, stand up. Come here. So I come from a culture out in the Pacific, in American Samoa, where we dress like this. He's very brave to do this here in the winter. So
Yeah. You look fantastic.
But my point is having soft skills, hard skills, emotional issues, and now we come to culture versus institutional knowledge with families and how we raise our families and things like that. I guess as a new governor, my point is how can we lessen the worry that is out there, or the concerns that our citizens have? because of the way things are going, not only in the U.S., but all over the world. So just a general question.
You're as qualified as anybody to answer those questions, both of you. So.
I don't. The fact that I haven't killed my mother yet is really fascinating to me. I'll tell you. Like, it's really hard. It's really hard. I think we have more information flowing at us in an unprecedented flooding way, and I think you cannot discount the level of information just flooding. And I think one of the problems is a lot of people, you didn't know what you didn't know, and now everybody is talking, and I think that's a good thing. That's always a good thing for people to talk, but then the malevolent feelings are going to be able to manipulate. And so what you've taken is an amplification of information never before. And a couple years ago in the New York Times, I read a column where I said, places like the Facebook and others were the digital arms dealers of the information age. And I think it really is having a deleterious effect on all our brains. And you can see it, and as a parent, you certainly know that. You have a feeling. As to getting along, maybe we could be nicer to each other, I guess. You start with that, but that's not happening from our leaders at all.
Emily, any?
I don't have anything. That was good.
Yeah.
Governor Murphy of New Jersey.
Hey, Carol, this is for you in particular. We're from Jersey, baby.
Jersey, baby. Yeah.
Fascinating discussion. You know, this is Tammy and I this is our 8th and final NGA, and when you're from New Jersey, you always feel a little bit like you're an outsider looking in. I have to tell you, we've finally arrived. Having an F-bomb dropped from the podium, I feel right at home.
Sorry. Glad to help.
Yeah, I love you. So mostly an observation, but one question within it. About a year ago, I think I was closer to you, Jared. It sounds like Spencer's more extreme in terms of
Big government.
I'm a huge extremist on this.
Yeah, no, I know you are.
And I'm demanding the next question.
No. So even up 6 months to a year ago, I was not sure where I wanted to land on cell phones. I'm now become a huge hawk and am a bell-to-bell guy, and we're trying to get legislation to do that. I was struck by, I think Jared mentioned that a lot of the schools that have done it are elite private schools or upper income. I heard about a district in South Jersey and went to visit them a few days ago, and it's a great community, Woodbury, hardscrabble, working class, 75% black and brown students. They got some notoriety because they adopted a bell-to-bell. They use what's the company, the pouch?
Yonder. I did a great interview with him. He's a fantastic CEO.
So I said, I want to come see you. And it was like everybody was paid to say the right things. They were over the moon. So I deliberately did a separate session with the teachers and then did a separate session with kids. And by every metric you can imagine, socialization, achievement gap, quality of the inside classroom, how it extends to how they use their phones or don't use them when they're doing their homework and at home at night, their interactions walking to and from school. It was amazing. It was like a movie set. The one question that came up is they did middle and high school, and they debated before middle, and they came out against it, but have left that question open. What advice would you two have on that specific question?
You mean like a 4-year-old?
Should you be able
with
to have a
cell
phone in elementary school?
Yeah,
No.
anything below
No.
6th grade.
No.
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 What?
No.
Why would
No,
you give?
what?
You don't give a 4-year-old a cell phone. Let me give you that piece of parenting advice. Don't do it. I mean, they can watch Frozen 200 times on
This is
my
probably more
iPad. I'm
likely
not
a
talking
4th
about
or
anyone
5th
in
grader.
particular.
I think
What?
that it's crystal clear if we should not be having phones for the 4th and 5th. No.
Okay.
Not at all. No,
I'll
nothing.
take that back.
Nothing. I mean, again, they can watch movies on them, but
Again, thank you for making me feel at home.
good. Anytime.
Governor Cox.
Thank you. Thank you, Jared, for your leadership on these important issues. Emily, Carol, actually, let me start with you. I just want to thank you for your help during the pandemic, for adding nuance where there was often none, and for encouraging the public health side of things to actually be honest with people. I think that was a lesson we all should have learned. Kara, thank you for sounding so much like a Republican so many times today. I appreciate that.
I confuse Republicans.
Yeah.
You know,
We're
all
a
the time.
little
I'm like, go
confused.
military. It's like, what? But then I'm like lesbian. So anyway, sorry. Do you know I'm forming a militia Etheridge? I got $1 million.
Oh my God.
Go ahead.
I'm getting there, I promise.
She belongs right there. Here's my militia Etheridge. She's definitely in over here more.
So, we...
Get it out, come on.
Is there a question?
There is. So again, one of the things we like to say is that at Governors, we can do anything, just about anything, but we can't do everything.
Right.
And so I was going to ask specifically on the education side, but since the AI topic has been so important as well, to both of you on what we've talked about today, if we could only do one thing, what would you have us do?
For education?
Either one, you choose.
Get teachers using AI, understanding it and using it as a tool so teachers understand. I'm often approached by teachers all the time, like, what should I do? I'm like, you need to start understanding it the way you understand the internet previously, or what it does and what it doesn't do. And I think the fixation on cheating drove me, sorry, of course, this is my mother, telling me what's latest on Fox News. I think the fixation on, I lost my train of thought now, of not using it and cheating and stuff like that's driven me crazy. Like and I think the media had a lot to do with it. It's like, kids are cheating with AI. I'm like, kids have cheated since the beginning of time. It's just another way to do it. And I think, so you have to you've got to get teachers using this stuff so they understand the implications and what it does. And I'm not against teaching people how to use these tools at all. I think we have to be able to understand what they're useful to. But the problem is we treat technology, too often it becomes a weapon and it should be a tool, but it couldn't be either. And so we have to start to sort of focus on the technology as a tool rather than a weapon. And every technology, from knives to everything, is a tool or a weapon, if you think about it. There's a great book by Brad Smith from Microsoft on that topic. So I would get teachers really involved in understanding what's coming and educating them around that so they can get their arms around where kids need to learn.
I'm gonna go like way simpler, not simpler to do, but just like which is to figure out the right way to teach kids to read. There's been so much policy discussion about the science of reading, and science of reading is great, but all the science of reading means is there should be some phonics instruction in your reading curriculum. That's all it means, and there are many reading curriculums with some phonics instruction. Different schools are doing a better and worse job of this. Figuring out what is the way schools are doing this that is working, whether it's looking at example districts that are doing it well, whether it is looking at across districts with some kind of data analysis. This is a solvable problem. There are districts where every kid learns to read and districts where almost no kids learn to read, and we gotta dial that in because that is gonna be the foundation for all of this other stuff, and I think it is very doable with some focus.
We talked a little bit about, increase in autism, whatever you call it, but let's broaden it, say it's about different learning styles, neurodiversity. Mm-hmm. Obviously, whether it was 100 years ago or today, every parent knows different kids learn in different ways. Some are visual learners, some are experiential learners, some think differently. How can we do a better job, any thoughts, on kind of meeting the needs of vastly different learners? And can technology help in that regard with different learning styles kids have?
Unfortunately, technology is often used as a babysitter, right? It's, every parent understands that. And so the question is, where does it apply well in any situation? And again, it used to be with internet, you just look things up and then went searching for it. Again, AI does deliver really interesting educational opportunities of synthesis once it gets more accurate. It's going to, look, everyone's talked about hallucinations. It will be accurate at some point, and it will be prone to manipulation. That's something we need to pay a lot of attention to. But I think that you have to be able to understand the way it's going. And so I think the uses of things like that are important to help kids learn, or as I said, create lesson plans. I still think screens in schools it's just too much of an addiction. It is. And again, I don't think they add to the, I mean, when I was a kid, they would, they put up the videotape, when they wanted to teach us something, but it's not any different. I think it's a babysitter more than anything.
I agree with that. I mean, I think the other piece of this is, we are asking a lot more of kids in early school than we used to in terms of ability to sit still and to learn. The expectations about learning to read in kindergarten and first grade are just beyond, and the ability to sit still beyond where they were when I was a kid. And I think that generates a lot of heterogeneity that's not really about ability, it's about maturity. And so I think thinking a little bit more about, is there a way to be a little more flexible with some of this early childhood stuff we're talking about with Matt, to try to bring kids into school at a time that they are better equipped for the executive function demands of school.
There you go again.
And just to be clear, we do see, if you had Richard Reeves up here from American Institute for Boys and Men, he would say boys tend to be a little bit slower to develop early on, and that it may make sense to hold more boys back, to sort of think more about maybe boys need more years of preschool than girls on average. And I think that if we could deal with that kind of heterogeneity early on, we'd actually be in a much better position to get all kids to be able to sort of move through the executive function pieces that they need of school, in addition to the IQ pieces. Not your kid.
I know, but there's also the physical element of it in schools,
Yeah.
the sitting and the stuff. There's a lot of what things you could do. I wasn't joking about let them run around the playground.
No, and then they say, your kid has ADHD. We see sort of kids who are young for their grade are overdiagnosed with developmental issues, basically because of youth and not because of.
I think your point is we need to be wary of when they say autism increased a lot, attention deficit disorder increased a lot, things that would have been called something else, but there are unruly kids when I was growing up, but they didn't call them that, and it's just different ways.
then it was
And
right
our
to the
expectations
drug.
for whether that kid was going to be able to sit still for 8 hours with crisscross applesauce was completely different.
Yep.
Yeah.
Governor Healy.
Thanks, Jared. 2 questions. Is there any shot at teaching people to discern truth, facts? Is that even possible anymore? And then, we're all politicians looking to communicate on education, on a whole range of things. How do we most effectively communicate to people in this day and age?
Yeah, I think the great worry is that we're in a post-fact world, right? And it was interesting because I do think the problem is people 25 to 45 right now. I think that's where the real issues are around misinformation. I have found my sons, one's 19, one's 22, my older kids, to really understand the information environment we're in. And I sent them something about some misinformation, and my son wrote back, he's like, we knew that already. We knew that was a lie. And it was they're very attuned to the operation of the technology, just the way we were with TV. Remember, it was the boob tube, and now it's the smartest thing ever. You watching Severance, of course you are, you're brilliant. But it changes, and I think these kids do have a comfort with the technology in a certain way. But there's no question that this stuff the flood of information is designed, the flood is the point, is to confuse and upset you. Just for people who remember being in a Circuit City. Do you remember Circuit City?
Of course.
I used to write about retail here at the Washington Post, and I was walking through Circuit City with the CEO, and he goes, the wall of confusion. And I was like, what? What is the wall? And it was the televisions that were all up on remember there were hundreds of televisions, and they would make them all bad except for the one they wanted to sell, which you would go to. It's so manipulative. But it was meant to confuse and upset you so you'd buy the one that you wanted, which I thought, kudos to you, sir, and you're a terrible person, at the same time. But I think it's really critical to understand that it can get played by malevolent players, and it is getting played by malevolent players, whoever they may be, sometimes foreign influence, China, Russia, I would say Iran, a little bit North Korea, and then by domestically to get you to do things. And so I'm not sure what's going to happen going forward. I do think, though, my sons tend to be a little smarter on this stuff. I'm always surprised of what they understand, of what's manipulative and what's not.
I think the threat here is that people, you're on social media, you're on Facebook, whatever you are, and news comes in, and people have a very hard time. Something looks good, it looks like it's a real thing, but how do you know it's not a real thing? And then what they are doing, I think often, is looking to someone that they trust to tell them, is this real? is this, I mean, I would say the like main thing, one of my main jobs is is parents send me like, is this real? Should I be worried about this? And then they are asking because they trust that I'm gonna tell them whether they should worry about that particular thing. The question is, how do we develop people's trust in institutions, which was basically, particularly on the health side, which is a lot of where I spend my time, like was totally destroyed during the pandemic. So saying, well, like go to the CDC, people are like, well, I don't believe those people anymore. So I think your challenge is to say, how do you develop a relationship with your constituencies where they're gonna trust whatever experts you're putting in front of them, whatever kind of information is coming out. And I think it's really tough because stuff looks real when it's not, and there's a lot of motivated actors that are trying to make it look realer than it is.
Governor Evers.
Thank you. I thought I was sent to the principal's office. Just a quick comment, and phonics, great. We have to do it. We have to do it universally. I've been a teacher, principal, superintendent for most of my life. And I also believe that we have to understand that teachers and kids are together 5-6 hours a day. And I absolutely believe that what we have to do in the school day is absolutely important. The big but here, in my opinion, is affordable housing impacts how kids learn. Healthcare impacts how kids learn. Transportation systems impact how kids learn. So while we kind of maneuver around what happens in our schools, which I think is really important, we need to do a better job of learning how to read. But at the same time, those kids are only with their teachers a short period of time. We have to do both. That's my pitch. So I'd be really interested in your response.
One of the things drove me crazy is that there wasn't universal internet coverage across our country. We put up a chart we had one of the FCC chairmen at one of our events, and we put up a chart. We have the most expensive costs, and we're way down on the list in the United States in terms of connectivity. And to me, why we didn't have universal connectivity for people was always perplexing, and it was higher cost. And so if you don't have access to information, if you don't, even as bad as it may be or whatever, it sets you back completely. And so we have a digital have and have-nots. We have created this situation, and then we're feeding them entertainment. It's like Soma, from Brave New World. We're feeding them things to keep them occupied and distracted. I think the problem is it's a wholesale problem around housing, around transportation. But if you don't get the access to the information, you are 10 steps behind initially. So that's my area. I was always shocked that we did. It was like everyone had plain old telephone service, and that was critical for the economic development of our country. Everybody has the state and federal highway system, also a technology, but we never leaned into technology the way, the current technologies the way we did with the previous one.
So I think I would say sort of, from where I sit, from like thinking about this policy stuff, I think there's two pieces of that. So one is absolutely, like you cannot expect schools to be everything, but there is also, schools are an opportunity. And my sister-in-law is a principal in Brooklyn, and the kids, first graders show up to her school and, mom has a pimp and but when she gets them in the school, that is her opportunity, not only to see if she can teach them to read, but also to figure out what can I do for the family. And that's something we need to scaffold in schools. And so rather than sort of saying, well, what can we do at school? These kids don't have housing, they don't have transport, their parents they don't have enough to eat. Like, it's the end. What are the resources we can give to the schools where we do know the kids are showing up to try to reach out a little bit into the families? And it's a tough problem, but I think there's a frame on schools being opportunities that we could lean into there.
Emily, final question. If we're just whiteboarding it, you're the master of metrics, what are some potential metrics you think we should be measuring? When we're not to track reading and math, got to do better, know it. What are some other things? If you could think of just a few things that we should be measuring and looking at for outcomes for kids.
I do some basic socio-emotional I might run the marshmallow test. People differ in how but sort of like kids' ability to kind of wait for something, some kind of delayed, delayed gratification metric, and then I would put in something in high school around, like, do you have a plan? Are you prepared for some career? That's a bit harder to think about how to measure.
Yeah.
Kara, what's something that you have seen that will change the future that we haven't heard about, don't know about, so we're not AI, but what's something else out there that you think we should know about?
That they're doing up in technology?
That either is imminent or happening in technology or that will affect us or the work we do.
Well, they're all going to Mars and leaving us all here, just so you know. That's the whole plan. I think one of the things, I get away from technology. I was kidding about no homework, but I'm not. I think kids, I don't think we should have homework at all. I think homework should be declared illegal. I think you have to be able to give people, in this day and age with information pummeling us, you have to give kids a chance to breathe. I think we overwhelm, being around parents.
So we need to go back to the past.
In a way, it's like play.
Yeah.
The younger kids need to have more play and more free time just to sit and think. When's the last time any of you sat and thought quietly? It's almost impossible. Try it for 5 minutes without a meditation app on or something like that. You can't do it anymore. And so this state of continuous partial attention everybody is in, and that's a phrase a Microsoft researcher used, that's what we're like right now. And so when can they have those moments of quiet and play? And for the older kids, the same thing. When are the moments of non-achievement on the achievement wheel? And I think with so much FOMO going on, it's digital, it's also digital.
So the new trend is we're going to learn how to unplug. Is that what you're telling me?
I think so. I hate to say that. I really do. It would be great. You can't do it, and none of you can do it yourselves. And if you can't do it, your kids are.
We're kind of not allowed to do it as governors. We have to be on call.
You are allowed to do it.
The minute we do it, there's a fire or something.
Well, not you then. Fine.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I know we're out of time.
Oh, yes.
I just want to ask, I heard that in Japan, the first 4 years is that the kids don't have any exams or tests. They just kind of learn how to get along, teamwork, and very quiet. So maybe that's something for us to think about.
Very good. I want to let's give a great round of applause, Emily Osta and Kara Swisher. Thank you.
Thank you to Jared.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this.